Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, it's been a little while since we took a look at the channel Serious History. Did 3 reactions to some of his content back in the latter part of 2024. And I've created a playlist where you can find those, including the one we're going to look at today. And I will pin that down in the comment section below so you can check that out easily. This one's called The Greatest Last Stands in History. It came out back in January. It's got almost 1 million views, which is fantastic. And I think anything we can do to support Serious History and content creators like him is great. So the link is in the description to the original. You can go check it out. I'm just off the top of my head thinking of great last stands in history. And I'm guessing we're going to define that by people who fought knowing that they were going to die, maybe against overwhelming odds, but did so anyway. I think of the last stand of the Swiss Guard at the Vatican in 1527, the one that Sabaton made a song called The Last Stand about. Of course, in American history, we learn about the Alamo, 200 or so defenders against thousands of Mexican soldiers, killed almost to a man. And then another great one that I think of is, of course, the attack of the Dead Men at the Battle of the Austerlitz Fortress during the First World War on the Eastern Front between the Germans and the Russians. So we'll see which ones get included and which ones I know nothing about that I'm going to learn about for the first time today. So join me as we learn together. Let's take a look.
Epic last stands in history. Number 1, the attack of the Dead Men.
Yes.
Okay, we're starting off with one of the most disturbing last stands of World War I. And
it's disturbing for the German soldiers who were attacking. I don't know if it's disturbing in general, but it's such an absolutely epic story. And I hope when I eventually do get to Poland, I want to go visit this site. This is like at the top of my bucket list for Eastern Europe.
honestly, this was probably the closest thing to a real-life zombie encounter.
Agreed.
It's 1915, and the horrors of modern warfare are on full display throughout Europe in the Great War. New weapons are being deployed into combat on a
Well, you're not seeing any tanks, and especially not seeing any tanks on the Eastern Front. Tanks are first introduced in September of 1916 by the British at Flers-Courcelette, which is part of the Somme battlefield. You definitely weren't seeing them in 1915, and you weren't seeing anything like this on the Eastern Front.
daily basis with horrific, never-before-seen results, and this story is no exception. The German army has begun its advance into the Eastern Front and has its sights set on Auschwitz Fortress, a stronghold near the western border of the Russian Empire. This fortress was an extremely important choke point, as it controlled one of the only rail lines into the area. The Germans had been attempting to take Auschwitz since the previous year, but had met heavy resistance from the Russian defenders stationed there. Though often outnumbered 10-1, the Russians have managed to hold the fort through 2 aggressive assaults with a fighting force of only around 900 soldiers and militia. By late summer, German Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg demanded that Auschwitz be taken by any means necessary. And so, on August 6th, when the winds were favorable, the Germans unleashed a horrific new weapon on the men within the fortress walls. At 4 a.m., the Germans began firing their artillery at the fortress, and the Russian defenders braced for impact.
So we've talked about this here and there before, but the first use of poison gas, there have been tear gas and things like that, but the first use of poison gas in World War I was made by the German army in April of 1915 at the Ypres salient, a place called Saint-Julien. And it works way better than they're expecting it to, and it ends up creating this massive, something like 4-kilometer hole in the line. It was, I think, Algerian troops who were there, part of the French army, but the Germans didn't exploit it because they weren't expecting it to work so well. But this gas, it basically, they're not, like, eventually they're going to use it, like, launch it and things like that, but for the most part at this point, they're just releasing it. They're just opening valves on canisters and allowing the gas to go across. Because there were, I think it was part of one of the Geneva Conventions or Hague Convention, there was a rule in place that had been signed by the Germans saying they wouldn't launch it in artillery shells. Eventually they're going to do that anyway. So they thought it wasn't really breaking the rules to just release it and let it go across. And they're going to use chlorine gas a lot, especially early in the war, because it's a byproduct of German industry. It's something they have in abundance. It's the one that has kind of that greenish tint to it that you often see, and then later you're going to get mustard gas, which is that yellowish tint. Chlorine gas, when it's inhaled into the lungs, it causes a chemical reaction with the moisture in your lungs that basically turns it into hydrochloric acid in your lungs. And so you start like coughing up chunks of your own organs. It's a horrible, horrible way to die.
They'd lived through this before, and it seemed like another routine bombardment. But on this morning, a mysterious green fog slowly began to creep its way past the trenches and into the fort.
And it's heavier than air, so it sticks low to the ground, and it literally does just creep across the ground.
When the mist reaches the Russians, their eyes begin to burn. They start coughing uncontrollably, and as they take painful breaths of the green fog, their lungs quickly fill with blood. In a panic, a soldier turns and sees his comrade collapsing to the ground in a painful coughing fit, blood streaming from his eyes, nose, and mouth. The Germans had used chlorine gas against the helpless defenders, which on contact with soft tissue turns into hydrochloric acid.
Yep.
The Russians had no gas masks and were literally being dissolved alive by the deadly green fog.
Now, we often think of poison gas when it comes to World War I, but gas actually killed very few people, comparatively speaking. I mean, we're talking like the tens of thousands, maybe even only about 10,000. Many of them were Russian, but it's not the millions that died by things like artillery and machine gun fire. But it was used to great effect, especially for psychological warfare. And they're going to use different kinds. And eventually the mustard gas that they'll use, it doesn't even have to be inhaled, because pretty quickly the armies figured out how to get gas masks to their troops. So by 1916, chlorine gas isn't going to have much of an effect if you're wearing a gas mask. But mustard gas would irritate any exposed part of the skin. It would stick to your clothes. It wouldn't just disappear. It was nasty stuff.
Men stationed near the back of the fort scrambled to douse pieces of cloth with water and urine and wrap their faces in a desperate attempt to survive the gas attack. But it proved futile, and within minutes, the 900 defenders all appeared to be dead on the ground. An hour or so later, the Germans donned their gas masks and began their march into the fort. As they neared the trenches, they were greeted by the horrifying effectiveness of their new chemical weapon. Bodies of dead Russian soldiers lay twisted in agony, all seeming to have passed choking on their own blood.
And we're talking about a German offensive that's got something like, it's not quite 10,000 men, but there are thousands of German soldiers that are marching across this field toward what's left of the Russian defense.
Their hopeless attempts at makeshift face masks stained red cling to their faces. Their blinded eyes, raw like ground meat, stare into the sky, unable to be closed again. These German soldiers had never experienced the horrors of chemical warfare up close and are completely disturbed by its inhumane results. But as they march into the fort, they begin to hear rustling from amongst the dead bodies.
I don't think they get that far.
Haunting groans followed by gurgling deep coughs begin to echo throughout the fort, and slowly, one by one, the once dead Russian soldiers begin to drag themselves to their feet. The Germans step back in disbelief as they watch the corpses of the defenders seemingly come back to life, blood streaming from their eyes and nose, and their painful coughs send bloody pieces of lung flying out of their mouths. The undead Russians, clutching their bayonets, slowly begin lurching forward as if possessed by vengeance itself. Suddenly, defensive artillery fire echoes out, and the Germans look up to see more undead men manning the cannons. The reanimated Russians begin charging at the Germans, who all turn and run in a full-blown panic.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 100 of them that get up and fight back of these Russians. Most of them are actually dead, and most of that 100 that are a part of this fight are going to die afterwards anyway. They're in the process of dying. They just haven't gotten there yet. But the psychological effect of seeing this, and a couple of Russians firing artillery at close range and a couple of Russians manning some machine guns, and pretty soon you're seeing holes being torn into German lines, and the rest of them are like freaking out and running. So this is how 100 men are able to throw off an attack by literally thousands.
Dead defenders open fire on the fleeing German soldiers, and hundreds are shot down. Some are so desperate to flee from the sight of these unholy warriors that they impale themselves on the barbed wire lining the trenches, and many more are trampled to death by fellow soldiers running in horror. The German army retreats from Ozovik, and the siege is called off. The fortress remains in Russian hands. Though the 60 or so Russian defenders who survived the gas attack most likely met their end shortly following their last stand, they lived long enough to see Ozovik successfully defended for one final time.
So that's the first time I've heard the number being 60. Usually it's about 100 is the number I've heard, but different sources are going to have different numbers, so he probably has a different source.
Number 2, the Siege of Sigitvar. The year's
I don't know this one.
1565, and the Ottoman Empire has quickly grown into one of the greatest empires in history. Under the leadership of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottomans have steamrolled their way westward and now find themselves on the doorstep of Europe. He sets his sights on Vienna.
Vienna is, first of all, such an amazing city, and I'm going to be there in a couple weeks, and I'm really excited to go back. But Vienna is really on the front lines of the wars between the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim Ottoman Empire, and the Christian nations of Europe. And that's why you're going to have places like Wallachia, where you have, now Romania, which is where guys like Vlad the Impaler, they're the buffer states. They're the Poland of this era. Poland becomes that kind of buffer state in World War I and World War II. I mean, World War I, it doesn't exist yet, but in World War II, between the Soviets and the Germans, you have Belgium on the Western Front. And these Romanian states are kind of that in this time period.
Last line of defense to the European continent and home to the rulers of the mighty Habsburg Empire. Throughout his 4-decade reign, Suleiman has truly lived up to his nickname, but now in his 70s, his health has begun to fail. If he was to make a play to invade Europe, it needs to be done now. So on April 29, 1566, he assembles his army and begins his final march towards Vienna. But on his way there, his troops run up on this small fortress called Sigitvar that refuses to surrender. The fortress is commanded by a man who'd been a constant thorn in his side, the Croatian Count Nikola Zrinski. Now by this time, Zrinski and Suleiman were very familiar with each other. Zrinski had played a key role in defending Vienna when the Ottomans first attacked in 1529 and had been a part of many successful defenses against Suleiman's forces. As a faithful Christian, he hated the Ottomans and had devoted his life to guarding Europe from their rule.
If you ever go to Vienna, go to their war museum there. It's got some incredible history all throughout history. I mean, it's got things like the car that Franz Ferdinand was in when he was shot in 1914. It's got his uniform that's got the bullet hole through the neck and the blood stain, and it's got the couch he died on. But it's also got a lot of stuff related to these wars against the Ottoman Empire. They've got battle flags that were captured in 1683 during the Battle of Vienna. And they've got stuff related to this stuff from the 16th century as well. Amazing.
Knowing that Zrinski was stationed at this fortress, Suleiman orders his men to stop and set up camp. They'll take Sigitvar in a few days and crush this annoying pest once and for all before marching on Vienna. So on August 1st, Zrinski looks out at this mass of Ottoman soldiers piling up across the moat of his fortress, and he knows things are going to get bad real quick. He has with him just 2,300 Croatian and Hungarian defenders. Even if he were to send for reinforcements, they would still be no match for such an enormous army. More likely than not, his fate is sealed. But perhaps not the fate of Vienna and the Habsburgs.
Right, so you have a choice to make, and this is a similar choice that is made by the defenders of the Alamo, where you've got, you're surrounded, you're probably going to die. You're probably not going to get rescued from this situation, so how do you go out? I mean, that's really all you can do, is decide how you're going to go out.
While he may not survive the upcoming siege, there's a chance he can stop Suleiman here and ensure he never reaches Vienna. Zrinski calls his men together, who by this time had all seen the Ottoman army outside their fort. He reminds them that it's their duty to fight to the last man against these invaders, and
there's a certain incentive for them in seeing this as a religious war. This is Christianity versus Islam. So in a sense, you can feel like you're dying for God, you're dying for Christ, and this is a noble cause.
That he'll personally shoot any coward or deserter. Unsurprisingly, they all swear to defend the fort to the end. Now, to really get a feel for this epic battle to come, you have to understand the weirdness of the Sigitvar fortress. See, Sigitvar was in fact 3 islands, each with a separate fort. The New Town, the Old Town, and the Citadel.
Wow.
The only way to the Old Town is on a bridge from the New Town, and the only way to the Citadel is the bridge from the Old Town. If the Ottomans want to take the fortress, they'll have to break through Zrinski's defenses 3 times, and he was planning to make it as painful as possible. Suleiman's entire army shows up to Sigitvar on August 5th, and the sheer mass of men is a terrifying sight for the defenders. 100,000 soldiers and 300 cannons surround the fortress. But in defiance, the defenders drape bright red cloth from the fortress walls, sarcastically welcoming the Sultan's men as guests of honor, followed by a single cannon shot fired directly at the Ottoman army. A message so clear that it needs no translator. If you want this fort, you'll have to come and take it.
I love it.
The Ottoman
I love
siege
it.
begins on August 6th, and their cannons quickly rip apart the new town. Against all odds, Zrinski's defenders are able to return fire and successfully stop the first assault, inflicting heavy casualties on the Ottoman attackers.
I mean, obviously your problem as the besieged force is you're outnumbered like 40-1, but you're also going to be limited in supplies, and eventually you're going to run out of gunpowder and ammunition and food.
But this victory is short-lived, and a large part of the new town walls crumbles on August 9th, forcing Nicholas' troops to retreat across the bridge into the old town. Despite his rapidly deteriorating health, Suleiman personally arrives to Sigetvar the same day. He wants to be there to see Zrinski's death with his own eyes. The Ottomans quickly set up their forces in the new town and begin their assault on the old town on August 10th. Cannons and artillery pepper the walls of the fort from all directions, and Suleiman's generals order full assaults at the old town main gates. Zrinski's
I'm
forces
honestly surprised Suleiman didn't wait and just try to do this as a traditional siege, but there may be a time element to this. Obviously, he's ill, he wants to get it over with, but he also might be thinking about what reinforcing armies might be coming, and he wants to quickly deal with this.
held the unrelenting assault 10 times, inflicting heavy casualties on the invaders. But ultimately, the old town falls on August 19th, and Zrinski's men are forced back into the citadel. Some of his troops near the front line are jumped as they're rushing towards the final bridge and are forced to watch in despair as the gates close on them. By this point, the Ottomans have sustained far greater losses than they anticipated, but Zrinski's forces have suffered greatly as well. Only 600 of the 2,300 defenders have survived.
Wow.
Suleiman, sensing his time was short, begins to send messages to Zrinski asking him to surrender. He promises him rule over all Croatia if he just gives up and turns his back on the Habsburgs. But his offer falls on deaf ears. With no response, the Ottomans begin to fire letters into the citadel, promising Zrinski's troops that if they surrender, their lives will be spared, but not a single man leaves.
So they start by offering him, all the trappings of wealth and power, and now they're going to his men.
With diplomacy a complete fail, the Ottomans resume their assault and manage to blow a massive hole into the wall of the citadel. Buildings on the last island catch on fire in the explosion, and Zrinski and his men steel themselves for a final defense. But surprisingly, no attack comes. See, unknown to the defenders, a wave of dysentery has swept through the Ottoman camp, probably from drinking the nasty-ass water around the fortress. Suleiman himself, who is already incredibly frail, reportedly contracts the same infection and dies in his tent on September 6th.
Wow, so dysentery, that's one of your biggest enemies in warfare.
Commanders issue no orders that day and keep his death a secret from everyone, afraid that after such heavy losses, the rest of their army may begin deserting if they know their sultan is also dead. But Zrinski and his men are not granted much time to rest. On September 7th, the day after Suleiman's death, the Ottoman army makes a final push to take the citadel. Greek fire spreads on the walls, setting the fort on fire, and cannonballs and arrows rain into the fortress onto the hapless defenders. Realizing they have no chance of victory, Zrinski gathers his remaining men and says, "Let us go out from this burning place into the open and stand up to our enemies. Who dies, he will be with God. Who dies not, his name will be honored. I will go first, and what I do, you do."
It reminds me of the scene in Lord of the Rings at the Battle of Helm's Deep, where at the very end, they're under siege, most of their men are dead, and they ride out against the hordes of Uruk-hai.
"And God is my witness, I will never leave you, my brothers and knights." Zrinski and his men push one of their last mortars to the front gate. Without warning, they fling it open, startling the Ottoman soldiers waiting on the bridge and fire directly into their formation. He then leads his remaining 600 men in a final charge out of the fort and down the bridge. The defenders of Sigetvar will go out in a final blaze of glory. Zrinski, leading the pack, is hit with a bullet and then another and slumps to the ground dead. His men stream around their beloved commander, shouting their battle cries as they engage the enemy. Their final charge does not last long, and they are all soon put down. The Ottomans, sensing victory is at hand, charge into the open gates of the citadel, eager to take out the remaining defenders. But instead of defenders, they're greeted by a single wounded soldier sitting on the ground holding a torch.
How hardcore is this? This is straight out of a movie where you run through, you finally got victory, and there's the guy waiting to just light it and blow it all up. Oh, I love this story.
Ottomans reach him. He lights the remaining gunpowder supply, triggering a massive explosion, killing another 3,000 of the Sultan's men.
Oh my gosh.
What was supposed to be a short detour on their triumphant march to Vienna had instead cost the Ottoman Empire over 20,000 men and their Sultan. Suleiman's successors would never reach Vienna, and his death at Siegedvar marked the beginning of the downfall of the empire itself.
Yeah, the Ottoman Empire is going to start going through a decline where you've got a series of weaker and weaker leaders, and they start losing more and more territory to where by the early 20th century it's on its last legs.
Number 3, the Battle of Sargari. It's the closing years of the 19th century, and in an area of the Indian Northwest frontier, the British Indian Army have found themselves under increasing attacks from local Afghan tribes. Though once allies to the crown, these tribes have begun to sour on the increasing British presence in the area, and now see the encroachment as a violation of their sovereignty. To defend their newly acquired territory, the British Indian Army had repurposed forts built by the conquered Sikh Empire near the Khyber Pass, and stationed members of the 36th Sikhs, an infantry regiment made up of Sikh soldiers from the Punjab region, to man these forts. In the fall of 1897, two forts in particular, Fort Gulliston and Fort Lockhart, find themselves under heavy assault from these tribes. Despite being outnumbered, the British Indian forces had been able to beat back the tribes each time, leaving them frustrated and looking for an easier target. And this is when they set their sights on a small outpost in the tiny village of Sargari. See, the two forts were miles apart and communicated through a Morse code via a signaling station in a small fort in Sargari. Messages from Gulliston were sent to Sargari, which was then sent to Fort Lockhart and vice versa.
That's cool.
The Afghan tribesmen realized that if they knocked out the signaling station, the two forts would no longer be able to coordinate their defensive reinforcements properly.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, communication is so key. And I've read somewhere, I don't remember who it was, but you know, there's this book series that came out a long time ago. It's like an alternate history where I think it's called Guns of the South by Harry Turtledove. And somebody goes back in time and gives Lee's army some AK-47s. And I remember seeing somewhere somebody saying, you didn't need to give him AK-47s, just give him some walkie-talkies. That literally that would have been the game changer in war in the mid-19th century. And so communication is key. At Gettysburg, one of the first things Meade does when he comes to Gettysburg as commander of the Union Army is he sets up signal stations in key places so he can quickly communicate to his corps commanders on the battlefield without having to send somebody on a horse with a message.
Now, Sargari was barely a village, and the signaling station rarely saw any action, so just 21 men were stationed there. Despite being on the front line, this outpost was boring AF. But all this changed on the morning of September 12, 1897, when the soldier manning the signaling tower spots a horde of Afghan tribesmen suddenly appear on the horizon. He quickly sends a message to Fort Lockhart that Sargari is under attack and requests reinforcements, but the reply is swift, and it sinks the hearts of all men stationed there. All available forces are too far away, and the other forts can't be left unmanned. No reinforcements will be coming. Fort Lockhart then signals Sargari they count an estimated 10,000 tribesmen bearing down on their location. It's at this point, Havildar Ishar Singh, commander of the outpost, instructs his 20 soldiers that they'll fight to the end and do their best to stop the advancing horde. Though they will most likely die here today, they may be able to buy enough time for reinforcements to reach the other two forts. Staring death in the face, each man solemnly accepts his fate and springs into action.
That's one of the things I love about so many of these last stand stories, that they're really not in vain. When you think about sometimes the thing that they purchase with their lives is time. Time that is desperately needed by other elements to be able to do what they need to get done.
They quickly reinforce the gates to the fort, taking their positions on top of the wall, and wait anxiously as the giant wave of tribesmen gets closer and closer. The soldier stationed at the signaling tower remains at his post, observing the action, and will send updates to Fort Lockhart through the entire engagement. At 9 a.m., the tribesmen rush the fort, and the fighting begins. The Sikh are deadly marksmen, and the advancing tribesmen quickly begin to fall. But no matter how many bullets find their mark, the mass of attackers doesn't seem to change.
Just too many.
From the sea of bodies, the tribesmen fire back at the soldiers on the wall and manage to kill one of the defenders. Against all odds, the Sikhs push back the first wave, and the tribesmen retreat and regroup. There's little time to celebrate as another wave of Afghans soon begins storming the fort. The Sikhs take out more attackers, but the tribesmen are closer and manage to take out more defenders with small arms fire from the ground. Every defender lost is a huge blow to a fighting force of just 21 men, but they sell their lives at the highest price, each taking out dozens of tribesmen before meeting their end. Eventually, the Afghans, quickly growing tired of being murked so effectively, begin shouting out to the Sikhs, "We offer you wealth and safety, just give up the outpost." But their bribes are quickly answered with bullets. The tribesmen, frustrated with
At this point, these men inside this fort have they've accepted the fact they're going to die. So there's nothing you're going to offer them at that point. They've already made their decision, and they're going to stand and they're going to do all they can. Plus, they probably don't trust you.
Their failed attempts at both siege and diplomacy begin to set the brush around the fort on fire, creating a dense veil of black smoke. The defenders struggle to see their enemy in the darkness when the signalman sees a frantic message being signaled from Fort Lockhart. The tribesmen have used the cover of the smoke to sneak around the fort to the undefended signaling tower and are making their way in. The wall near the signaling tower is soon breached, and screaming tribesmen begin to flood into the fort. Ishar sends some of the remaining men to defend against the breach, but this leaves the front gates vulnerable, and soon tribesmen have broken through and begin flooding in from the front. Running low on ammunition, the Sikhs resort to bayonets and swords.
Wow.
The men in Fort Lockhart helplessly watch through spyglasses as brutal hand-to-hand combat erupts within the fortress walls. The Sikh soldiers fight on bravely against impossible odds, but one by one begin to fall. Ishar commands his remaining men to retreat into the inner walls. As they run past him, he defiantly stands in the way of their attackers. His final moments are spent heroically engaging the horde of tribesmen, buying his men just enough time to retreat and lock the gates behind them. With Ishar slain, the Afghan mob storms to the inner walls. The defenders spend the little ammo they have left, but it's no use. Within minutes, the final gates protecting the survivors are broken and the remaining Sikhs are all brutally killed. The only man left in Sargari is the lone soldier in the signaling tower, who at this point sends his final message to Fort Lockhart. "Permission to take up my rifle." The commander of Fort Lockhart solemnly closes his eyes and replies, "Granted."
Wow.
He watches the signalman neatly pack up his equipment into a leather pouch and affix his bayonet to his rifle.
Oh, this
the lone
is so
survivor
cool.
then proceeds to
I mean,
take
not cool
out
for him. He died, but it's an inspiring story for sure.
40 more tribesmen who try to attack his position. The men in Lockhart cheer him on with every kill, but the last ounce of hope is soon lost when a thick black smoke engulfs the tower. The tribesmen had set fire to the tower itself, and the last defender in Sargari is burned alive, shouting the Sikh battle cry for all to hear. "One will be blessed eternally, who says that God is the ultimate truth."
Wow.
The last stand at Sargari lasted 6 hours, and against all odds, the 21 brave Sikh soldiers managed to buy enough time for reinforcements to arrive at the two forts the following day, and when the tribesmen attempted to attack the forts, they were easily beaten back. The British forces reclaimed the remains of the Sargari signaling outpost and found the mutilated bodies of the 21 men surrounded by over 600 dead tribesmen. Havildar Ishar and his men stationed at Sargari were posthumously awarded the Indian Order of Merit, the highest award an Indian soldier could receive at the time, and was equivalent to the Victoria Cross.
I love learning new stories that I didn't know before, and there's a couple of really good ones there. And there's so many great stories of Last Stands. I wouldn't be surprised if he does another one, or if he has already done another one at some point. What is a favorite Last Stand story that you have from history? Let us know in the comment section below. Check out my playlist of other videos related to serious history. It's pinned in the comment section. Thanks for watching.